Welcome back to the KAHI Afternoon News. Good afternoon. I am Casey Freeland. Pleased to be joined by Congressman Tom McClintock. Tom, I want to start with your take, and we'll talk about it in depth, but yesterday's House Judiciary Committee hearing where it seems like Democrats were basically more interested in kind of talking and getting themselves on TV and criticizing Attorney General William Barr rather than getting answers to questions that I think a lot of the public had. I mean, I've heard the word fiasco. I've heard, a lot of different things thrown in there. You were in the room. Tell me a little bit about it.
Well, I think fiasco is fair. They invited the Attorney General to a hearing and then wouldn't listen to him. It was quite clear they had no interest in asking questions and getting answers. They were simply there to attack him, and I think that came through loud and clear. He is trying to clean up an enormous mess that was left behind by the previous administration. The use of our most powerful institutions, the Department of Justice, with all of its ability to ruin people's lives, to take away their freedom, their livelihoods, to raid their homes. And it was being used for political purposes. And when Attorney General Barr took over, he decided that was a very dangerous road for us to be taking. Appointed the U.S. Attorney John Durham to investigate wrongful conduct at the highest levels of the FBI. And we have to remember what these corrupt officials at the FBI did to our country. For more than 3 years, this country was consumed by this Russia hoax. They took information that was fabricated by a political campaign. They knew it was fraudulent. They used it first to justify an investigation that alleged treason against a presidential candidate, then leaked the existence of that investigation in a manner that was clearly and coldly calculated to affect the outcome of the election. And when they failed to achieve that result, they then used it to obstruct the duly elected president. This Attorney General is trying to get to the bottom of that and right this wrong before it becomes a precedent for future election interference by corrupt officials in our justice and intelligence agencies. That's why the Democrats are so angry at him.
Has any attorney general in the past, in your opinion, had so much on his plate at one time? I mean, considering how many different issues that he had to answer to and how much he's got going on in his day-to-day life.
Well, that's the other thing that was absolutely striking was this full-throated defense of the violence that is going on across the country by these leftist Democrats. They kept claiming they were mostly peaceful protests. Well, as I pointed out, you're either peaceful or you're not peaceful. You can't be both. So calling these mostly peaceful protests is a lot like calling Scott Peterson a mostly faithful husband or Al Capone a mostly law-abiding businessman. What's going on in our cities is not peaceful. It is direct attacks directed at business shopkeepers, at homeowners, and at federal property, and of course that's why the president has had to intervene in those cities that were refusing to defend federal property. They're not there to override the local police departments. They're there to protect federal property. And again, this is what Barr is being criticized for doing.
The American public, I mean, anybody with a brain in their head is just fed up with what they're seeing, especially, up in Portland, or you can cite Seattle over numerous incidents as well. This is a little off topic, but I had Ron Lawrence, who's the chief of police of Citrus Heights, in studio yesterday, also the former president of the California Police Chiefs Association. And we kind of laid it out as far as the rioters versus the protesters. They're two distinctly different groups. Rioters are people that want to destroy federal courthouses and are throwing fireworks and all kinds of armed things at police officers who are feeling so handicapped by the politicians that govern them. It's a very scary time, and police morale is not in a good place right now.
Well, and it gets worse than that. I mean, if you take a look, well, first of all, it's not just happening in Seattle and Portland. Don't forget, we had another riot in Sacramento the other day.
Very true.
That destroyed businesses. We've seen them tear down statues in Sacramento, just 20, 30 miles from Auburn. So that's going on close to home as well. But the thing that really troubles me is the situation in St. Louis, where you had a couple who were in their home. They were confronted by an armed mob that had broken down their neighborhood gate. trespassed on their property and threatened their lives. And when this couple lawfully armed themselves to warn off this attack, they're now being prosecuted. And yet not one criminal in this mob has been charged. Meanwhile, we're seeing over and over again citizens in many of our cities who send out frantic calls to local police departments to protect them from mob violence, and the police don't answer that call because they've been forbidden to by their left-wing mayors and city councils. And the message is unmistakable to the American people. The police will not protect you, and you're forbidden to protect yourself. And we have to remind ourselves, without law enforcement, there's no law, and without law, there is no civilization. That's where the left is taking our society, and it scares the hell out of me.
Me too, and I think a lot of the people in our listening audience as well. We're visiting with Congressman Tom McClintock here on KAHI. There were a lot of things discussed. They talked a little bit about the Roger Stone sentence and the decision to drop charges against Michael Flynn. I mean, was that just filling time? I don't even know why that necessarily needed to be part of the hearing. You guys had so many different things to talk about, and it seems like it's almost like sour grapes about it still that won't go away.
Well, I think the situation with Michael Flynn is very important, and it does need to be brought up because we're learning more and more about how General Flynn was targeted and prosecuted and then extorted by those same corrupt officials at the FBI. No one's been held accountable for this grotesque abuse of power. These were the highest levels of the FBI with a political agenda. They took what Flynn said, edited it, misrepresented it, prosecuted him based upon those misrepresentations, and then extorted a confession of him by threatening family members, specifically his son. And they have so far done so with impunity. And one of the questions I asked Barr is why, first of all, knowing this conduct, why would anyone in his right mind ever talk to an FBI agent again? And why hasn't anybody been held accountable?
Yeah, and obviously there's still more to... do you think that this is going to come more into the light as we move forward, this particular Flynn instance? Because as you're saying, I mean, it's a huge story and it's been glossed over quite a bit.
Well, the left-stream media is ignoring it, but it is so corrupt and so, again, such a frightening abuse of power. Again, we give these agencies the power to destroy people's lives. We entrust them with those on the assumption that they are going to be very careful with those powers and use them to protect our justice system. And they've turned those powers around in a very political and corrupt way. That is, again, that's what Barr is trying to clean up. And my great fear is, if he is replaced next year by somebody like Keith Ellison, who's being talked about as Biden's attorney general, well, my God, not only are all of the investigations of this corruption going to be swept under the rug, nobody's going to be held accountable. And this kind of conduct, I am afraid, is going to become a fixture in future administrations.
Is there any follow-up plans for the committee to hear from Attorney Barr, or was that kind of a one-time thing?
No, I think that Nadler and the Democrats were so badly burned by this hearing, they are never going to let him anywhere close to it again. But if we have a Republican majority next year, yes, we will call him back and get to the bottom of all of these issues.
Want to change gears, talk a little bit about the Senate, which has basically, from what I'm reading, kind of rebelled against the $1 trillion stimulus bill that was unveiled on Monday. Let me just start with a question. Of these three areas, in your mind, what's the most important? Another round of stimulus checks for Americans, extending some sort of benefits, whether it's $200 or $600, or focusing more in on what is becoming a potential eviction crisis with the eviction moratorium for around 12 million people expiring last Friday. I mean, is there any way we can kind of order those or prioritize those in your mind?
Well, this is the fundamental problem is that we don't have the trillions and trillions of dollars that it would take to keep this economy propped up because of these heavy-handed lockdown orders. I've often pointed out it's not the government that finances the economy; it's the economy that finances the government. Once you shut down the economy, you shut down the revenues that government uses for its programs. and trying to use government funds to keep the economy afloat means you're borrowing deeply, deeply into the future. You're basically destroying the future of this country. Our kids and grandkids, in addition to meeting their own needs, are going to be forced to pay back these funds. Every $1 trillion that we borrow, and this is now all borrowed money, is about $8,000 for every family. I think I may have mentioned to you, I had a friend in Arizona whose teenage son had a part-time job, lost it because of COVID, is now getting over $3,000 a month in unemployment benefits, far more than he was making working for the community center. And he says, "Well, I'm just teaching him the wrong lesson. I don't think I'm going to allow him to keep that money." And I said, "Well, he's going to be paying for it for the rest of his life." That came out of a $2.5 trillion measure that was necessary in order to prevent temporary job losses from becoming permanent, but included a lot of very, very bad spending that our kids are going to be paying for the rest of their lives. Unfortunately, those job losses are becoming permanent. There was an article today saying nearly half of the jobs that have been shut down because of these heavy-handed lockdowns are now going to be permanent job losses, and we're going to see a contraction of our economy at about the rate of 35% in the next report. This is just devastating and so unnecessary. The lockdowns have not saved any lives. I mean, if you look at what's going on in Sweden right now, their mortality figures follow a typical viral curve. Up exponentially for the first 30 to 45 days, and then gradually down to the point where they're experiencing 1 or 2 deaths a day in all of Sweden. I mean, their crisis is all but over, while we've needlessly prolonged ours and done enormous damage to the economy to boot. And the death rate between Sweden and the United States is continuing to narrow, and I think when all is said and done, you're going to find that we have about the same death rates. The only difference is Sweden maintained its economy, kept its kids in school, and states like California utterly destroyed their economies and destroyed the year of education for their kids.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk more in depth about the education and the debate about whether or not to send kids back to school next week. I mean, as far as, your briefings from the different health officials, you mentioned it seems like Sweden is on kind of the downward trajectory of this. I think the one thing
not just downward trajectory. I mean, it's down to 1 or 2 deaths a day in the entire country now.
Yeah, and what I meant is here, it doesn't feel like if we're looking at, between a scale of 1 to 100, 100 being the end, I think a lot of Americans, we're just confused because we don't know where we are, whether we're a third of the way through this, halfway through, or just at the beginning. That's the part that's kind of frightening as far as the disease, I guess.
Well, and the damage that they've done.
Yeah.
Again, these lockdowns haven't saved lives. As we look back on this, I think we're going to realize the lockdowns actually cost lives. Suicides, drug and alcohol abuse deaths, domestic violence deaths, not to mention delayed cancer screenings and other health procedures. The death toll from the lockdowns is going to far exceed the death toll from COVID.
We've been visiting with Congressman Tom McClintock here on KAHI. Tom, as always, we appreciate your time, and we'll look forward to talking again soon.
Thank you so much, Casey. Take care.
We'll take a quick break and be right back here on KAHI.